episode of Holly's World Podcast. This is Holly, and this is the epicenter of everything cool and CrossFit and fitness, nutrition, movies, TV shows, wrestling, and soundtracks, which has always been a passion of mine since I started going to movies. But I really got serious about movie soundtracks when I watched The Natural with Robert Redford, and that was probably the first movie I really paid attention to soundtracks. So I'm very lucky today. I'm joined by the very awesome, rad, cool, and kick-ass Mike Golka, who I met at Omaha Comic-Con, otherwise known as OCon. And it turns out Mike has a deep passion for movie scores as well. So I've invited him on, and we're just going to get right into it. Welcome, Mike.
Well, thank you for having me on, Holly. I know this was kind of a brainchild from 2 months ago or whatever.
Yes.
We talked about it for a while, so.
That was one of the funnest nights, was sitting with you guys out on the patio at DJ's till 12 in the morning, talking about everything from wrestling to podcasting to music to everything. And it was like this cosmic experience for me to be able to talk to people who love movie soundtracks, movie scores as much as I do, and want to actually talk about it ad nauseum. So let's start with something super easy, which is, tell me about when you started paying attention to music in movies, and what was the first soundtrack you collected?
Man, I think it really, honestly, it started almost from the beginning when I was a little kid, like 2 or 3 years old, because I grew up on the Star Wars movies and the James Bond movies. And so both of those kind of go hand in hand with the soundtrack of the movie. And so ever since then, it was just something that always stood out to me, that if it didn't have a good soundtrack, then I felt like half the movie was missing in a way. But if it had a great soundtrack, it only enhanced the movie that much more. So I guess it's kind of always been one of the things I've always been interested in. And it's hard not to listen to the music when you grow up too with your parents listening to Mannheim Steamroller, and it's all music. So it's just kind of one of those things that goes hand in hand, I guess. So
I agree with you. Star Wars was definitely a fundamental soundtrack in my life, and I would say that I've listened to all the good and the bad soundtracks, and there's certain pieces that are still on my iPod because I like when Darth Maul shows up in his score, and obviously I think John uses he uses like the Empire Strikes Back or like the Darth Vader march, I think, for When I Call, which is kind of it's funny, and I love it. But it's such a, I mean, it's iconic, of course. It's iconic. And I feel like you do, which is the first thing I truly pay attention to in a movie, no matter what, is I listen first. And if the music is something wonderful, I immediately want to and get my hands on it as fast as I can. For a couple reasons. One, Spotify has a lot of music that's movie soundtracks that I can listen to. We've utilized our library to listen to soundtracks, and obviously I pick up pieces off of Apple iTunes. But let's talk about what some of your favorites, like all-time favorites, as far as what you own and what you like to listen to over and over and over and over. Or what do you think are some of the best out there that you've ever heard?
A lot to unpack there, but first I would say that as far as owning them, I go into mainly a lot of onto iTunes and just downloading them, whichever song that I want, because there's certain ones that stand out to me throughout, and it's kind of goes hand in hand with like another hobby of mine where I like to build like theme parks in Roller Coaster Tycoon or Planet Coaster or something. And so if I hear a great piece of music, it's like I want to incorporate that into my park. And those are kind of awesome because you can insert custom music. And so I really want the that piece of music to put in there. And so the amount of soundtracks that I have from different movies is a lot. I mean, I've got them all the way from back in the 50s. I have some movie soundtracks from like
Really?
50s and 60s, like Hatari or something like that, from way back in the day. And of course, some of the good, the bad, and the ugly ones that go way back. But I guess the ones that I really is like Jurassic Park, the Indiana Jones ones, a couple of the James Bond scores that I have. Those are the ones that I actually have physical copies of. But as far as just ranging from movies goes, I've got tons. Some of the best ones that I've heard, and I feel like, to me, the first three Indiana Jones movies has the perfect range throughout the three, from Raiders to Temple to Last Crusade, because yes, they're all three Indiana Jones movies, but they're three vastly different scores. But they might have the same themes or whatever sprinkled throughout, but just listening to the three of them, completely different. I mean, in Temple of Doom, you didn't hear the Raiders theme that's iconic in its own nature until the end credits of the movie. And so that one to me is probably my favorite, and the one that stands out the most to me. There's a couple other movies like Warcraft, for instance, that has a big overture just at the start of the movie, and it gets you, to me anyway, pulled me right in from the first sound of the movie. Kind of like what you were saying, you listen first, and right there, that movie soundtrack. And then I've got that one actually as well, and that one almost top to bottom for me, all 20 tracks is great. So those are a couple of them. We can kind of go back and forth, I guess, with like some of your favorites too.
Yeah,
because I'm interested to hear.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. I love John Williams. I think he is probably one of, if not the greatest composer of our time. Certainly in the top three. His music, no matter whether it's a Jurassic Park movie or Indiana Jones or Star Wars, or anything else that he's created, Jaws,
right,
is distinct, and you can listen to it. Like I said, for me, it's the same like with a movie. If a movie has rewatchability, it's the same thing with the soundtrack. If I feel like I can listen to a soundtrack over and over and over and over, and depending on my mood or what I'm feeling like, that exemplifies to me what makes a great soundtrack. So I can literally an entire month, as nutty as it sounds, listening to the new Transformers The Last Night. The soundtrack was Steven Jablonsky, and it's tremendous. It had some truly tremendous pieces in it. I still go back to last year's Suicide Squad, which most people didn't like the movie. For some reason, spoke to me. I don't know if it's because everybody was kind of an oddball, and they all came together, but the score itself was terrific, and I continue to listen to it on a regular basis. I have so many favorites. I mean, I think and the different music that was composed for the first three Lord of the Rings movies, which I listened to again over and there were specific, I can relate to, let's say in the second movie, there were, let's say Aragorn was getting ready to ride off on his horse, and he turned around and he looked at, I can't think of her name right now, but he turned his horse around and looked at her, and then he went off on his horse to fight the orcs. And I love that piece of music, and thankfully that's in the Lord of the Rings, the Tower movie. And
yeah, so, Two Towers. The Lord of the Rings movies, and I talked about, I had a blog post on Dim that I kind of brought up a little bit, but the Lord of the Rings movies, especially the Two Towers that you were talking about, those three movies I think are also different from each other. Yeah, they have some of the same themes, just like any trilogy of movies or sequence of movies. But the thing that stood out to me in the Two Towers was, since it's more of the evil is getting more power, there's a lot more Urukai themes that permeate throughout all of the songs. And I thought that difference was great that Howard Shore used in that movie. And just a lot of the main driving rhythms from Fellowship were modified slightly to get it more like the Sauron's forces undertones were starting to dominate the conversation, kind of a thing. So that's, yeah, those Lord of the Rings are another good example of just slight differences in the movie or the music makes a big difference in the feeling of it. So I 100% agree with that.
I agree. And I think you've got a so much better handle on how music fits a movie than even I think about. So I love that we're going in depth on this. This year, I think there were some really good soundtracks. The soundtrack to Excalibur was, I haven't heard it. I can't recommend it highly enough. There's just certain pieces. And I knew, like, for example, in Excalibur, when Charlie Hunnam's character as Arthur, the first time he puts his hand on the sword, and there's kind of like this electric shock to him, but the music matched it so perfectly that I sat there mesmerized, knowing in that moment, in that movie, that I was like, I got to go get this music immediately, and I've got to listen over and over and over and over, and I'm like, pick it up in my brain without having to think about it. And that's where, for me, the true love comes in, is when I have fallen so deeply in love with the music that I just want to hear it in my head at beck and call. And I feel like we're sort of in my opinion, I think we're in the golden age of composers. Like, for example, I know I'm not going to pronounce it right, but Michael Giacchino, he did
Giacchino.
He does great music. Steve Jablonsky does great music. Obviously, we can't, talk without mentioning, like, Danny Elfman. Danny Elfman is his music can be dark to match Tim Burton's themes, but there's a whimsy to it too. I love pretty much everything he's done, other than some of the movies themselves. So or pick up the soundtrack for Planet of the Apes or that ridiculous Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and they're probably good soundtracks, but I'm sort of like, yuck, they're like just not my type of movie, that I'm not going to listen to music. But like Hans Zimmer, I mean, when I listen to his music of The Rock, when he did The Rock, or Stellar, he could really just, put paper clips on, along a chalkboard, and I'd probably listen to it.
Sadly, that's kind of what he's lately been doing, it seems like, in some of his movies. Because we kind of touched about that on Daydream Instruction Manual a little bit. But no, Hans Zimmer's, especially Gladiator for me, from Hans Zimmer, is the one that, for me, stands out the most out of all of the work that Hans Zimmer did. Because The Rock soundtrack, I don't really know how much his name is on it with Nick Glennie Smith, because it was like it was like a tag team, because Nick was like his Padawan learner, if you will. And so I'm not sure too much how. And then Hans took over the Pirates of the Caribbean, because his Klaus Badelt was his the guy that did the first one. And then Hans kind of took that and ran with it in the later ones. But speaking of pirates, one of the newer guys is Jeff Zanelli, took over for Pirates 5. And I thought it was great.
Okay.
That was probably the last soundtrack that I've listened to that's really been awesome to me, just how he incorporated some of the old Pirates themes and then transformed them into his own. And I thought it fit the movie perfectly.
I'm going to check that out, because I've sort of avoided, ever since we made the mistake of seeing Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and then 3, and we finally learned our lesson after 3. We were not going to shell out cash to watch that dreck and dribble. And what made it worse is that I don't know why we hate Penelope Cruz. I don't know what it is. So we didn't see 4. Heck, we're not going to shell out to see The fifth one with the silly shark zombies flying over and it looking just like garbage.
You know, as I never watched any of the trailers, but I had heard about the shark thing. And after seeing the movie, I actually thought they did the shark thing perfectly fine. Like, it made sense to me in the way that they did it. And they didn't overdo it either. There was no Sharknado.
Which is too bad because, you know, nothing's better than an Ian Ziering Sharknado show with Tara Reid. In fact, not the last one, 5, but in 4, my absolute favorite wrestler, Seth Rollins, was in Sharknado 4, and thankfully, by the grace of whoever directed or wrote it, Seth survived Sharknado. So happy to hear, you know, and that's what makes me excited, Mike, is that there's a soundtrack out there. I haven't heard it. You're recommending it. I'm going to give it a listen. And I appreciate that because I'm always looking for a great score to add to my iPod to listen to all the time. It makes such a difference. I know that there's a passionate community out there that loves soundtracks, and it's just a matter of, you know, tapping into that. So,
yeah, from that soundtrack, the tracks that I highly recommend would be like Salazar, his theme, that's Javier Bardem's character. And then there's a song called I've Come for the Butcher's Bill, and that one is just the driving action sequence that get the big bombastic song quality that just gets you excited for something awesome's happening on screen. So those are the 2 that I highly recommend from that if you've not listened to that track.
If I find it, they'll probably get downloaded to my iPod. So let's talk about what's on our iPhones right now that we listen to that we really like. Because people are always asking me, well, what do you have on your, what do you have on your iPod or your phone? And I'm always like, yeah, I don't know that you're going to know any of these, you know. And this is actually one from TV that I like, and I don't know if you've heard it. And I'm not completely familiar with the composer, but the music to Penny Dreadful, I probably have 7 or 8 tracks from him. Abel Korzeniowski, that's really good. I like his music. Let's see. Actually, for The Legend of Exor, Daniel Pemberton did the score on that, and I've got 4 of his tracks on my phone. It just kind of goes. And interestingly enough, I liked a couple of songs from the Thin Red Line, and the only reason I found the Thin Red Line was that music was used for the trailer for Pearl Harbor. And I don't even remember the music from Pearl Harbor. I'm sure it was sweeping. But the trailer music, that's the first thing that catches my attention. I pay very, very close to trailer music, and it's been an interesting year in the sense that a lot of, like, for example, the Marvel properties, which normally have these wonderful trailer pieces, have gone and started to use music from the 70s, which is
right.
In the 70s. I don't like the music from the 70s. I'm not sure there's anything from the 70s I liked except for Star Wars. I mean, that's it. But I really liked I can remember watching, like, the trailer for Pearl Harbor and the trailer for Vertical Limit, which was about, like, this hiking accident. Yeah. And man, what I wouldn't give to get my hands on that music. And then I did. I found it. But luckily, there's people much more versed at finding that music and making it available. So geeks and nerds like me can download it to my phone and then listen to it over and over and over and over and over. Tell me about some of the music you have on your phone or your iPod that you like to listen to.
A lot of, as far as score-wise goes, because I listen to vast range of music, but as far as score-wise, I really like to listen to, well, The Rock is one of them that comes up. That soundtrack, almost top to bottom, is just, you can just listen to it for an hour and a half, and you know exactly what's going on in the movie when you're listening to it. That's the awesome thing.
a great story.
Yeah. I also listened to a lot of the Warcraft ones, some of the Pirates of the Caribbean ones, Gladiator, some of the Apollo 13 that James Horner did is really awesome to listen to. Then I dive into some video game scores too, because some of them are really good. So like stuff that Naughty Dog did, which they did Jak and Daxter and Uncharted, but and Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot and Jak, I listened to those soundtracks quite a bit. Even getting into some of the old Sonic the Hedgehog 2 score, some of the best music I'd ever heard in video games from there. And of course you get like Contra and Red Dead Redemption, and just a bunch of video game scores I like to listen to, because it's something when you're playing a video game that you don't really notice at times, but the more you play the game, the more and more the game soundtrack gets in your mind. And then as you're playing the game, you kind of like, I remember this, or I remember listening to this same song 50 times while it took me to beat the game. That's exactly the example for Crash Bandicoot, since it took me like an hour to beat some levels, and I got the same minute-and-a-half song playing 60 times while I'm trying to beat it. So the listening to the music gets kind of second nature at that point, and then it's like, okay, now I got to go find that music and download it, which thankfully is, like you said, is made available in some places that you can find it. So those are kind of the ones that I listen to when I'm not listening to like regular music, I'd say, like heavy metal or rock or something. But
So I think you're probably, yeah.
But going to
that
point where you were talking about finding the music, you and I were kind of talking about this, and I had mentioned it months ago, where in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, there was that piece of music that was missing that I could not find on the soundtrack. Like it was from the tank scene, and the song on the soundtrack is called Belly of the Steel Beast. And so I looked at that song, and it's like you said, you matched it up, and you're like, no, there's a part missing. So I've been looking for it for 10 years, easy. And I kept looking all over, like maybe it was an unreleased thing that they threw into the movie last minute, like there's sometimes to do, like they write it and it doesn't make it on the soundtrack. Well, then just happenstance, like a month ago, I was going through that soundtrack again on iTunes or whatever, and I click on just another song. And this time when it previewed it, like it caught part of it, the part that I was looking for, and I was like, wait, that's it. So I went to YouTube and actually went and listened to the music of that track. I was like, that's the song. So what it was, it's called On the Tank. But so in the movie, they split the song Belly of the Steel Beast into two parts and sandwiched On the Tank between the rest of that song. So it's not part of the song, and it was just its own separate track, and they split that other one. So that's why it doesn't match up. And so I couldn't find it. And then so once I found it, I was like, heck yeah. I've only been searching for this for a long time. And it's that feeling, it's like, man, it's like I was Indiana Jones and I uncovered lost treasure or something. So
it's funny that you say, because that's the exact analogy I would use, is that when I find a piece of music that I've been searching for a very long time, and then I've been searching. For example, I'm currently searching for, it's on YouTube, and it's just the intro music to a great show that was on NBC called Powerless, and it has this great, it's maybe 30 seconds or 60 seconds, and I can find the music on YouTube, but then finding it to download, either I'm not doing enough research or homework, but I can't find the music to download. And it's a great little piece of music. It would fit in perfect with listening to it at work, or definitely for working out. And that's when that's when I feel like I'm literally digging into different areas and websites and everything I can to find one little piece of music. And the nice thing is there's always comments out there that said, yeah, this is great, but it never says, oh, well, here's where you can download it. And it's the great eternal search for that little piece of music that you desperately just over and over and over and over. I can tell you for this year, I'm hopeful. There hasn't been a ton of soundtracks that I've glommed onto. I was in good shape with Excalibur. I knew I was in good shape with Transformers. There's been some movies that I've listened to the soundtracks, and maybe I just need to watch the movie again, like Wonder Woman. I listened to the score for Wonder Woman, and there wasn't really like a bunch of different pieces that I wanted that naturally spoke to me, because I hear it, but then somehow it talks to me on the inside. It's indescribable. You know what I'm talking about,
Right?
But it's wanting to hear those pieces and the whatever it is, the strings or the piano or the guitar, whatever it is, you just want to hear it.
Yeah, to that point, it's kind of one of those things that if I walked out of the movie and didn't immediately notice the soundtrack, then it's probably one that I'm not going to be going back to look for. At the same token, like what you said about the Wonder Woman soundtrack, I remember listening to some of that music. Now, there's some cool parts of it, but there's no, what to me is more or less a driving force. There's no big overture that stands out. And so, and the reason I say it like that is, say you're listening to just the soundtrack as opposed to just watching the movie with the soundtrack. The soundtrack might make a whole lot of sense watching what's happening on screen, but then you take that away and you're just listening to the music. And when you're listening to the music, if it doesn't elicit a reaction without the video behind it, then to me, I don't think it's doing its job. If you have to have two different mediums put together to make you feel a connection or whatever, then to me, it's not as memorable as, say, you listen to any Star Wars track. You immediately know there's some driving rhythm. There's something that's making you feel pretty awesome when you listen to it, just the rhythms and just how epic it sounds. Whereas in the Wonder Woman, there was a lot of stuff that played to what was happening on screen. It just couldn't stand by itself and be like, you can't, besides like the Junkie XL, like screaming guitar riff or whatever heavy metal part that, yeah, you know, that's Wonder Woman. But a lot of the other stuff, if you listen to it, you wouldn't tell it's Wonder Woman. And to me, that's what makes a great iconic thing, as opposed to just another thing that looks great on screens, fits the movie. It just doesn't stand by itself, and probably over time, kind of a thing.
I think that's a perfect description, Mike, because you could take any piece of any Star Wars movie and you can play it. So what is going on in the movie based on that piece of music? And I could say the same thing about Howard Shore, you know, in the Lord of the Rings movie. So I love that point you made, and it's a great point. I had not discovered Junkie XL. They did a score before they did the Mad Max score, which was my other favorite score from, I believe, last year. No, actually, I take it back. It was 2014. That's right, 2014. And I can listen. There's a piece of music in there where Max and Charlize Theron's character, Furiosa, and they are fighting off these motorcycle bandits. And it is by far, it's probably going to go down as one of my top 10 pieces of music of all time, because it can come up, I can watch the movie in just that one segment, and the music matches what's going on the screen so perfectly. There's a symmetry there. To me, it's like magic because it's so perfect. And I understand, you know, I'm not completely familiar with all their music. I wasn't familiar with Daft Punk until I heard the Tron soundtrack. And actually, you know, the Tron movie was a decent movie, and the soundtrack is outstanding. And most people, you know, I don't know if they've heard it or not, but I just keep it in my car CD thing, and just in case I run out of books to listen to, because I can always listen to that music. I feel the same way about, you know, a lot of the work that, like the soundtrack from The Winter Soldier. There's pieces out of that I work out to whenever I'm not in class. It's always playing on my iPod. And I wouldn't even call it the Captain America theme. It's just 9 minutes. But it's a perfect piece of music that builds. I know exactly what's going on in the movie, but it also fuels me in my workout. And I love being inspired by that. I think that's why I like soundtrack music so much, is that even if it's something like, Darth Maul showing up, it's still like this rousing piece of music. Like, man, I want to get in there and,
Yeah, the Duel of the Fates is definitely what stands out to. That scene and song pretty much makes Phantom Menace for a lot of people. But another one that's not overly driving, that's very an emotional piece of music from Attack of the Clones, is Across the Stars, which is the Anakin and Padme kind of love theme. And
yes.
I mean, man, that song just by itself, without seeing what's happening, elicits a lot of emotional reactions to it. Heck, my brother and I, when we were putting together some graduation videos, would include that in like the credits or at the end for going off and doing new things. And a lot of people always ask us what that was from, just not seeing Attack of the Clones. And so they were like, wow, that's really, really good. And so it's music like that that just, stands out, makes you want it. And like you said, you use it to work out a lot. Like, it's sometimes for me too, when I'm just driving somewhere and I'm listening to like a score for maybe the chase scene from The Rock, like that piece of music. And it's like, now I don't want to go just wrecking stuff, Grand Theft Auto, and just trashing a Ferrari and then saying it's not mine. I don't want to do that, but it like makes me excited to drive, or listen to the Batman theme while you're driving.
Yes.
And then that's really with Danny Elfman's awesome score from Batman and Batman Returns. Just gets you pumped to say, So yeah, I feel the same way on some of those great scores.
Do you have any shows that you watch that you like the music from? I mean, for me, it's easy. Like, there's pieces from Game of Thrones that I really like. I mentioned Penny Dreadful. I have a bunch of others. But this music I can't get my hands on. There was a Netflix series called The Keepers. It was a documentary series, and I would do anything to get my hands on that intro music. And I can't remember who the composer is. Somebody I recognize, and but I haven't been able to track down that piece of music yet. Are there TV shows that you mentioned video games, which is I forgot about that there's a whole industry dedicated to making soundtracks just video games. I know, like, I had downloaded to Elder Scrolls and some other stuff. Downton Abbey has some great music, but are there TV shows that you like the soundtracks for? Yeah,
I don't usually watch a whole lot of TV, but the one of them that I do watch is one you mentioned, was Game of Thrones. And yeah, now that one, I like Ramin Djawadi. He's quickly becoming one of my favorite, if not, he's rapidly getting up into the territory to hold his own against a lot of what we probably say, like the Hans Zimmers and John Williams and James Horners, those guys. He's really ascended since 2005, up and getting into that range with all the stuff that he's doing. Because I think he did Excalibur, didn't he, that you're talking about?
Daniel Pemberton actually did Excalibur.
Oh, okay.
But I agree with you, and I thank you for pronouncing his name, because I would not want to massacre it or murder it or anything like that. Yeah. But I do love his music. I actually didn't like his music for Westworld.
I was going to talk about that next.
Is spot on. So I'd like to hear what you think about, because for some reason the Westworld music didn't resonate with me. I mean, I could listen to Game of Thrones probably every day, every other day. Especially the season 6 music was outstanding, just outstanding. There's pieces where I could say, oh yeah, that's when Arya's doing this, and I remember this, and but I haven't fallen in love with the Westworld music for some reason. I'd like to hear your take on it.
Honestly, I like the Westworld music a little bit more than the Game of Thrones music. And the reason is because I really love how, like, so opening theme songs, though, goes to Game of Thrones for sure. The Westworld opening theme it was okay. It wasn't maybe what I would have thought of, but the rest of it to me was spot on point. Especially, I love how Ramen did a difference between what was happening in Westworld and what was happening in the, I guess, real world kind of a thing, where they're in like the labs or whatever. When they're in Westworld, they really play to the Western ragtime feeling, and I loved it. I thought, especially and some people said that they didn't care for how they took modern day songs and put them back into like a ragtime piano. I thought it was great. The minute House of the Rising Sun came up on there, I was like, looked at my brother and I'm like, oh, I'm sold. Like this is heaven for me right now. But especially the Sweetwater theme from the soundtrack of Westworld is just great. It's perfect. It encapsulates however I would get into Westworld. I want that song playing. But I really like the techno heavy, bass heavy stuff that they do in the labs, and it gives like a modern, futuristic kind of a Tron feeling to everything that's happening in the lab with the robots out of Westworld. And I thought the difference between the two was so dynamic that it immediately stood out to me, like especially the bass heavy stuff when it was Dangerous Intentions, I think is the name of the track off the album, that's near the end of the series. I thought it was great. But so the more I listened to the Westworld soundtrack, then I started to dawn on me, like, yeah, I really like the difference in the two. Struck a good dichotomy of styles, and the way Ramen did it was just great, in my opinion. Now, with Game of Thrones, yeah, he's got the medieval feel for everything, which is, can't disagree that I don't love, because I mean I love the Lord of the Rings and then like the 13th Warrior that Gary Goldsmith did.
Oh my gosh, that is like one of our all-time favorite movies. John and I could watch it every day because we're like, first of all, as a movie, we're like, this is great. Here's a bunch of guys who just take orders and don't talk back to the leader, and they just do their jobs. Yeah. Like, wouldn't that be great to work where everybody just does their job? There's no back talk, and we're all in it together, and it's great. But the score, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I love that score.
Yeah, and
I absolutely love that score. That is one of my all-time favorites.
There's a big nice driving like theme in there, adventure theme. And it's like what you were talking about with movie trailers, with how there's like a 60-second snippet that you're looking for, but you can't find it. 13th Warrior has a lot of this on their soundtrack. The Rock is the same way, where there's like a minute and a half thing that you want, but it's buried in a 6 or 7 minute long song, and you got to go find it, figure out what track it is. And yeah, the 13th Warrior has got that, and I think it's like the Swordsmaker or something that I found it, that is the one that I wanted, that main awesome piece of music from 13th Warrior that just makes you think, holy smokes, this is awesome. But yeah, Goldsmith did a lot of stuff that I liked too. He was, to me, the master of what I call kind of the exotic sound, where he could go and write pieces of music from different parts of the world, and it fits that part of the world. He did the Congo soundtrack, and a lot of it just sounds straight up out of Africa. He also did the Mulan soundtrack. And,
I love Mulan soundtrack.
And it sounds so Chinese. And
yes.
Goldsmith nailed that soundtrack. It just fits the area of the world. He was the master at, to me, in my mind, of picking up and researching just music from around the world. Because you see a lot of sometimes composers get into their realm and they just write their orchestrals to what they're used to. Goldsmith, I think, went out of the comfort zone of a lot of people and strived to get the authenticity of the area of the world that the movie was shot in. And so that guy, too bad he passed away.
He was, and it's funny, it's interesting that you mentioned Jerry Goldsmith, because again, he would be considered like a composer hall of, in the composer
Right.
hall of fame. One of the soundtracks he did, I believe, was for Hoosiers. My father loved basketball. He was short, and he played high school basketball because he hustled more and faster and harder than everybody else. And so as kids, we grew up with a love of basketball. And I remember having that cassette and just listening to it, again, over and over and over, and watching certain pieces of the movie. He was, to me, a chameleon, as you put it, in the sense that he could, instead of having, there's certain composers out there and you can listen to them and it's their music. They kind of have a footprint, if you will.
Right.
But Jerry Goldsmith never had a footprint. Every soundtrack he did or score sounded completely different from whatever else he did. And there was not this, I can easily pick up I can tell that person's going to do that score because that just sounds like them. And I think that's what makes really great composers, is that they're able to imbue the music somehow with themselves, and they are able to differentiate the sound.
Yeah, Goldsmith, like, one that stands out to me from the rest that you would just never think that he did is Total Recall with Schwarzenegger. Like, that is such a modern techno kind of a thing, and Goldsmith had not really done. Granted, he did like Planet of the Apes from the 60s or 70s, but Total Recall stood out vastly different from anything that he ever did. And so I'm glad you touched on that, how his and John Williams, even though he might be my greatest composer I've ever listened to, but it's like you said, a John Williams score the second you hear a John Williams score. You know exactly what it is. You know that sound. But he, like on Jurassic Park, he ventured out and had some islands kind of vibe to it, kind of exotic in nature. So he does it. But John, though, I've never known a composer to use every instrument in an orchestra that John Williams does. But yeah, I was glad that you brought that up about Goldsmith, about how all his stuff sounds different, because it does. Like, it not only varies in style like techno or orchestra, but it also goes into like different parts of the world, and it's pretty awesome.
Are there any I'm in a rare position this year, in the sense that there is yet to be a trailer where I'm listening to the music. I got to go get that. Like, right now, this minute, I need to run that to ground. The closest I've come to is some movie that has Josh Brolin as a wildfire firefighter. I don't even know the name of the movie, because I'm not going to see a movie about people battling firefighters and dying. But the music is kind of the music I like. It's sort of that epic swing. When I think about movie trailer music, which is like for the first Avengers movie, the first Lord of the Rings trailer, I hated Jupiter Ascending, but the trailer music for Jupiter Ascending was terrific, and it really didn't show up on the soundtrack. I loved the music that was used for the trailer for Interstellar. I could probably watch the Interstellar trailer over and over, just because I liked how they matched music. They did with Vertical Limit, the same way they did with Pearl Harbor. It made me want to go out and watch the movie, but it also made me want to be like, yeah, I absolutely have to have that piece of music. And this year, I think because Marvel has moved more towards like these songs from the 70s that I can't stand. There's not a trailer out there. Even the new Star Wars movie, which you and I had a chance to talk about, and I tell people this all the time, and we all laugh about it, and that is and I hope we can talk about for a couple minutes, is the new Star Wars movie. You know, when we sat at that table, you said if anyone gets there, if Ridley says that she is Qui-Gon Jinn reincarnated, or if she says that she's Ben Kenobi's dad or whatever, you're going to cut your arm off and leave the theater. And I laugh about it all the time because it's so true. But again, that music doesn't inspire me yet either. And I feel like I'm in a desert right now because there's nothing I'm jonesing to get my hands on. And it's hard. I haven't seen Atomic Blonde yet, and I haven't seen Baby Driver, and I know Baby Driver is heavily music driven. We'll probably get it from the library on DVD because we're cheapskates. But I have yet to find something other than Excalibur and Transformers and anything else that I can really cling to as far as movie scores and or movie trailer music. So I'm curious to hear from you. Even the stuff we've watched on TV, other than the keepers, you know, we love the Marvel Netflix series, but other than the Daredevil theme, there's not like one piece of music out of those shows. And I think John Pesciano does the scores that I'm really interested in. I'm curious to get your perspective.
Yeah, the last one that besides Westworld, it's been out for a couple of years. The one this year that I wanted to go out and get was the Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales. That was probably the last one that I've really felt. Yeah, the Star Wars from, not Rogue One, but I guess even both Rogue One and Episode 7 wasn't really screaming at me to want to go get pieces of it. I guess it's not maybe fermented yet enough for me to want to go get it. Really, though, the last one that I wanted, well, Warcraft was immediate after that. And it's kind of like one of those that if it doesn't have something like that in it, then might take me a while to go get. Clash of the Titans was one that way back in the day, was one that I knew that I had to go get the music from Clash of the Titans from back then. But yeah, I mean, besides some of the Pirates movies, there's not been a lot of ones that I've been going out of my way to go get right as soon as the movie had come out. James Bond probably was the closest from like Quantum of Solace and Skyfall, and some of Spectre, but not really a lot of whole soundtracks that like the late 90s and 2000s when I was getting entire soundtracks, you know.
Exactly. Like, you know, when I met John in 1997, and, you know, we worked at the same engineering firm at the time, and I had, like, you know, all my CDs at the office with my CD player because that's how old I am. And, you know, John would say to me, you know, you have more soundtracks than any gay person I've ever met. And I'd be like, yeah, I mean, it's true. But I think there's a much wider variety. I think soundtracks, I think there's, like I said, a whole community of people who really love the scores, who pay attention to the scores. But I definitely feel like in the last year or two that other than like Mad Max Beyond Fury Road and Excalibur and Transformers and Suicide Squad, which I just love the music from Suicide Squad, there's two pieces on that score that are on my workout iPod that, you know, one takes place when Will Smith, as usual, is, you know, shooting everything up. And that's kind of I'd say at the 1/3 mark of the movie. Right. And then the last part of the movie where they're fighting the sorceress, this great piece of music where, you know, the crocodile guy has thrown the bomb into the big cloud of, and then Will Smith shoots, you know, the one, you know, shoots it, and it's this great piece of music. But I definitely feel like, and it's not John Williams' fault, it's just, but like the last two Star Wars scores haven't inspired me. You know, I've listened and I thought, yeah, that's okay, but nothing technically worth downloading.
Well, that's what, and I don't think he didn't do Rogue One, and he didn't do, Giacomo did Force Awakens.
That's right. That's right.
And then I don't think John did Rogue One.
Yeah, and neither one of them are like, they're kind of, I hate to say this, they're forgettable.
Yeah, I mean
for
there
me, they
wasn't.
are.
Now there was one from Force Awakens that I liked. Rey's theme.
Yes.
Is really cool. That one, and that one's another one where you've got a tiny snippet of music buried into a longer track. That's like, yeah, but I only want like that little section of it, you know. So that was one from Force Awakens that I did like, but it's not one of those that I was rushing out to go get to say that I could have it or I needed it at the moment. So.
Before we wrap up, I'm curious, are there any websites that you read reviews of soundtracks? I don't, but I should. But I'm just curious, are there any websites you read on a regular basis? Anything like that?
Usually I don't go and search somebody actively reviewing a soundtrack. Usually it's based off of my own feelings of it. Where I mostly see, I guess, technically reviews or feelings of is when you go to YouTube, when I'm previewing to buy a track, when I go to YouTube and I just go to that soundtrack to go listen to some of the songs off of it, and you just read the user comments on the music, that's when you get a bigger feeling about how interesting or how excited people are for that music. And to me, I think it's more of a genuine thing than just a straight up review of a music, because everybody's opinion's different. And the thing is if I'm going to something that I thought was pretty awesome and then I see a bunch of other people thought it was awesome too, then I feel a lot better about it. Granted, you could come across other things and that some people are negative about, but I think that to me is more of what I like to read is the people comments on, say, just different parts of movies, like, and then they tag the exact moment of the song. They're like, yep, this part is just pure gold or whatever. So that's more or less where I read my reviews of music. Because on iTunes you can go and you can comment on post reviews of songs before they even come out yet, and so there's people doing 5 stars saying, oh, this is great, can't wait for this, and it's like, well, it hasn't come out yet. Or there's 1 star and it hasn't come out yet, and they're like, no, I bet this is gonna suck. So it's like one of those things where it's like, I can't really trust iTunes so much. It's like a Yelp review.
That's true. That's true. To wrap us up, I'd like listeners to know where they can read your blog. So could you give a plug for your blog and also, just kind of give a general feel for what you like to talk about in your blog and things like that?
Yeah, my blog is over at secretsofdim.daydreaminstructionmanual.com. It's part of our podcast and you've had Eddie on the show before, I believe.
Yes.
And so Eddie and I co-host that Daydream Instruction Manual, and you can just Google search that, or we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Daydream Manual on Twitter is our handle. If you go to on Facebook, there should be links to all our podcasts. It's at just daydreaminstructionmanual.com will take you to the page, and there's a link to the blog on there. And on my blog, I just talk about many different things, variety of topics. But my most recent blog is on composers and soundtracks, and kind of giving a rankings of my personal preferences, I guess, of my thoughts on some of them. So yeah, you can head over there and check it out and leave some comments if you want. Or I'll post them on Twitter too, and you can find me at mgolka13 on Twitter, and usually I'll post all my links to blogs on there too, so you can find it there. And sometimes I'll just tweet out stuff about music and movies and whatnot too. So.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. Great conversation. What I'm going to do is make a list of all my favorite composers and pieces of music, and I want to revisit this again in the future, because I think there's so much to cover, and there's always movies or TV shows that I've forgotten about that I want to get your beat on. I also want to mention to to listeners, yes, get over to Mike's blog and get over to Daydream Instruction Manual. They have a tremendous podcast. It's a tremendous podcast umbrella of great podcasts. But I also want to say that Mike is a fan of craft beer and is extremely knowledgeable, smart, savvy, very world traveled, very well experienced. And he is someone that I think can be a great teacher to people like me who are just now at the very beginning, infancy, at the age of 49, getting into craft beers. And so I look forward to having a conversation. I hope you will join us in the future for Mike and I's next conversation. Sure. Will likely be on craft beers. We'll probably drink a craft beer while we're talking about craft beers. And then we're going to pick up soundtracks again in the future. So to all the listeners, get out there, go to mgolka13 at twitter.com, go to the Facebook page. But Mike, I want to thank you sincerely. Honestly, it was a pleasure. And I'm already excited to get our next podcast scheduled where we're going to be drinking and talking beer.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. It was my pleasure to be a guest on your show and talk about soundtracks because it's something I don't get to talk about a whole lot. So.
No worries. We're going to be talking about it all the time in the future, Mike, you and me. So it will be a regular, we'll figure out on a monthly basis how to make it happen because I think you and I could yak our ears off on all the great music that's out there that we want people to know about. So
right. Yep.
Definitely tune in for Daydream Instruction Manual. And thanks, everybody, for joining us. Talk with you soon.
Yep. Thank you.
This is Holly's World, and we're out.